Welcome to the Magdalene Codes. I'm your host, Valeria Marie Tignini, and today's special guest, Oliver William Huntley, will be covering the ancient mysteries of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and the Druids in Avalon. The ancient mysteries have interconnected with what is happening today in our current lifetime, and this information has brought us clarity, but also even some confusion as to what is really true. So today's stories will be based on what our guest has been collecting throughout his journey in his lifetime, as well as in his journey in Glastonbury, England.
Oh, thank you everyone for tuning in. It's such a joy to be here, even digitally present with all of you, and getting to share some amazing stories with all of you. And I think my role as a storyteller is just someone here who's to share perspectives and to share information. And the best part about receiving stories is it's up to everyone to discern their own truth. It's up to everyone to find their own resonance within a story. And even if you don't find resonance within a story, that's still such a beautiful blessing and a gift, because it helps you crystallize your truth. And so my name is Oliver, and my job is to tell stories and really to help people unravel deeper truths and deeper mysteries, especially when they come from things like the ancient mystery school teachings or the teachings of the Essenes, the Druids, the ancient Egyptians. I just personally love stories, and I love bringing people into the magic of these stories. So for the next window of opportunity, I'll be sharing lots of stories specifically related around Avalon, the mysteries of the Druids, the mysteries of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and getting to share my own perspectives on who they were and really how their stories really interrelate with a place called Avalon, which is known as Glastonbury in modern day.
Hi, Oliver. So you are in Glastonbury right now, aren't you?
I'm in Glastonbury right now.
And how long have you been there?
So I came to Glastonbury originally in the end of 2017. So I'm about a year and a half in now. And just, yeah, it's a place, funny enough, where I don't actually think people should even be living, because in the old times when it was Avalon, it was actually a place where no one should be living. You kind of came and you received transmissions, you received initiations, and then you would leave again. It's, very much like an initiation and an incubator for a lot of people. But I feel very fortunate that I can live here now, even if it's not in full alignment with what the original teachings of the Druids were. And just being on this land every single day, I get to receive more. And really, it's about learning to listen more. And so it's just about me being able to receive and understand the language of this land.
So what is the language of the land?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think a lot of people who have, visited different sacred spaces or sacred sites or places around the world, it comes with a feeling, just walking on the ground, just putting your bare feet on a sacred piece of land, you feel things. Like it starts to awaken things. It starts to almost be a transmission that comes right up from the earth. And in doing so, everyone forms a different relationship with that feeling, with that energy. And some people will see things, some people will get visions, other people will hear things. So when I say learning to speak the language, it's not so much that you're hearing physical words or audible words, although some people certainly do hear words and speeches. I think it's about attuning yourself to understanding what a certain site or a piece of land is trying to communicate, and you developing the ability to integrate and receive those transmissions.
The codes.
The codes, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so when you do receive these transmissions, how does it change you? What happens? Do you change? Do you, is it just something you keep with yourself and you don't share it with anybody? What's next?
Oh, I mean, that's another great question with like, what do we do with what we receive from these sacred sites? And the best way for me to approach this is there's no wrong way. There's no textbook that says you have to do this, you have to do that, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't do that. Everyone's on this beautiful, unique journey. And because of that, we're all going to integrate and receive these transmissions from the land in beautiful and unique ways. And so for me, I find the process tends to be different, the different places I'm in. So for example, Avalon, which was, we'll talk about soon, very related to the ancient Druids. And a lot of people call Avalon the heart chakra, or the heart center of the planet. And what's beautiful is that is true in some ways, But the ancient Druids actually would have called it or defined it or translated it slightly different. How they would have defined Avalon is it's actually the shadow gateway of the heart. And what I mean by that is the ancient Druids used to feel that, our heart was a temple. And in that temple space, there were different rooms or different chambers and different areas within our heart's temple. And what's important is that in order for us to fully inhabit our temple, the temple of our hearts, we have to explore and basically make a home in all the different areas within it. And so what Avalon is really designed to do, or at least what it was designed to do at that time, was to help people step through the shadow gateways, the things that stand as blocks or stand as resistances to fully coming into our temple. So why I bring that up is, specifically here in Avalon, a lot of people come here expecting it to be all love and light and bliss, and some people certainly have that experience. But for a lot of people who drop in deeply to land here, a process will be catalyzed. A process will start within us, and a lot of it has to do with purging shadows, purging past pains, purging traumas. So what I always like to share with people when they come to Avalon is it's really about shedding your resistances to looking at the deeper aspects of your shadow, and really being open to seeing how you can integrate all the pains, all the traumas, all the things that we've accrued in life that maybe have put a shell around our heart or closed us down. So this place, as you work through the magic, it's really important, again, to allow that type of shadow process to flow through you, which will ultimately bring you into a beautiful, more heart-centered and loving space. So here, it's really about having that ability to see all sides of yourself, especially the sides that maybe most people don't want to look at.
So when people go there, they're expecting, like you're saying, this beautiful, blissful experience, but they receive a lot of catalyzing within their ego self and cracking open their heart a little bit more. So the shadow self, that's so interesting, because I was recently in France, and I felt like France was the heart chakra of the planet. And not because not that it's the heart chakra, but it's one of the heart chakras. Perhaps it has many. So I'm trying to see, and I know that other people say that Bali is the heart chakra, or Colombia is the heart chakra. I hear so many different things on this. So it's interesting. For me, the planet's holding different energies to, like you say, catalyze the energy of the heart chakra, because right now that's probably the most important chakra to open as we move into this new paradigm. And so how has it opened your heart chakra? I mean, if this might be too personal, but but what happened? Like, how do you feel that to be true?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And again, in terms of people defining, what the heart chakra is or what the different chakras are on the planet, again, it's everyone's beautiful, unique journey to discover that and to find out, what resonates for them, because there really is no, 100% true map of all the nodal points and the vortexes and the chakras on the planet to say this is what it is. So everyone has their different experience. And I just personally find that this energy here at Avalon has a lot to do with bringing the energy down and within. And the reason I bring that up is because if you look at the 5 kind of ancient mystery schools of the world, so of course there's been many different mystery schools over the course of time. And in the ancient world, at the time of Yeshua and Druids, the Essenes, the Egyptians, there were 5 main mystery schools of the ancient world. And so you have the Druids here in Avalon, you have the Isis and the Hathor schools in ancient Egypt, you have the Essenes in ancient Palestine and Mount Carmel, you have the Tantric schools in India, and then you have the Himalayan masters up in the Himalayan mountains. So you have these 5 main mystery schools. And how I like to see Avalon is slightly different than the rest of them. Is a lot of these mystery schools, they're focused on bringing the energy up, talk about like opening your crown chakra, connecting with the divine realms, merging with God. And that's such a beautiful and important process. That literally is the process of ascension. So where Avalon is slightly different is Avalon's focus tends to be going down and within, going down and within. And a lot of that has to do with opening the pathways through the heart. And so when we think of the ancient Druids in Avalon, a lot of people think of the Druids as like these old men wearing robes, drinking mead, walking around stones. And in the modern times, and even up until today, that's very accurate. But what people often don't realize is that the original Druids, the Druids of the ancient world, were actually very matriarchal. They were very female-centric. And not to say that, men were persecuted and held down or locked in cages. No, no. There was just a beautiful reverence for what the divine feminine represented, because the ancient Druids would hold that because women have your womb space is actually in direct resonance with the earth Gaia mother's resonance. So just by having a womb space puts you as an oracular channel, an oracle that connects you with the energies of Mother Earth, of Gaia. And so what that does is it creates this process that's actually about going down, connecting into the planet, going through your feet, going into the earth. And a lot of it is, again, opening those channels that go down from your crown, through your heart, through your whole body. So what I've found here personally in Avalon, how it's really developed my connection, is I've spent so much of my time really, again, on the ascension path, trying to, again, open my crown, connect with the divine realms, merge into, the kingdom of heaven. And here in Avalon, again, you don't feel that same type of energy going up and ungrounding you. What you feel is this beautiful pulling, this energy that wants to root you into the planet and connect you into the frequencies of the Earth Mother, of Gaia. And so in doing so, it's helped me create a much more embodied sense of self, and my energy wants to inhabit my body as much as possible. And when the energy starts to really inhabit your body, what you find, often a lot of people find, is that it starts to release a lot of traumas and a lot of things, both physically in your body, but also emotionally, that we've kept in our body. And this, again, is very much in line with how the ancient Druids would have taught these activations. Again, it's about going deep within inside ourselves to see where our shadows lie so that we can clear them, and in essence create a relationship with them so we can merge to our higher self, or into a more holistic or whole state. So that's been my process this beautiful year and a half, coming up to 2 years, is that I've really gone into my body, learned about myself, merged with the aspect of where certain pains or traumas are lurking in my field and still really need to be seen and expressed, and creating a far more powerful relationship to the Earth Mother and the wisdom that comes from the Mother. And even if me as a man this lifetime, I don't have a physical womb, I still can resonate with the essence of the divine feminine, what that womb energy represents, and learn actually how to integrate that as a man, which has been even more powerful for me, because then it's helping create this divine balance within my field.
And so have you felt a merging of divine feminine, masculine within yourself from this process?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's definitely a merging going on. And also, I actually really enjoy keeping the polarities separate and sovereign at the same time, because, yeah, there's a beautiful need to help merge these qualities in us, because we all have both qualities. Men have their divine feminine, women have their divine masculine. But I also find that if we merge them too much, they start to almost forget who they are. And these archetypal qualities start to lose their potency in their polarity, which is, the very basis of what Tantra is. It's like that magnetism and dance between the masculine and the feminine. So instead of feeling that these qualities are fully merging in me, I'm actually just rediscovering what they each mean in my own field and learning the relationship they have to each other. So it's helping me come into contact with my own inner divine feminine. And this land is teaching me how my masculine relates to that divine feminine. Because in the ancient Druids, again, women held positions of highest spiritual authority because of their womb space, because of their connection to the Earth Mother. And it was actually the men that created this space of protection and honoring for them to do that work, while the men also had their roles. And so there was a deep understanding of the masculine's role in supporting the feminine's connection to the Earth Mother and her ability to be an oracle channel and to teach and to heal and to offer her unconditionality. So I'm learning what my own masculine means to my own feminine in that capacity. And I'm also learning my inner feminine's relationship to my masculine here. So it's almost like it's pushing them further apart, but their ability to communicate and relate with one another is becoming much more coherent.
Huh. Communicate. Well, that's a big one, because, right now we're in this era where we're redefining relationships. So many people are divorcing or having children on their own or adopting, and it's changing so much now. I feel like everyone's re-establishing their role as an individual, as a parent, as a being, You know, now with like even like LGBT movement, all of that is changing so much. And I feel like it's in relation to this energy that is shifting and somewhat merging, but in the end, really what it's doing, like it's like the Kundalini, the Caduceus, where it's kind of like doing this thing, right? It's like a dance. There's two individual energies, like you're saying. They're each on their own, but they're intertwining. They're merging in that sense, but still on their own.
Exactly.
So how is it now, like how is it all acting out for you? What is like the next step for Oliver here in Glastonbury?
No, it's another amazing question, a big question. For me, on a kind of grounded practical level, it's to keep learning more and more of these stories and being able to tell more and more of these stories. Because why I love stories so much is because I feel like that's the most effective way to communicate or to transmit wisdom. It's like I could just share facts with you and it would be knowledge and it would be very on a mental body basis. And a lot of people can learn that way. And when you tell stories and you share stories, a lot of what gets then transmitted is resonances within the imagination. And when things create resonance within the imagination, they have the ability then to shift or create stories. And I love the idea of personal stories as well. Like we get to share stories about, you know, historical figures or places, but we're also a living story. We're a story that gets told every single day. And it's almost like every single day is turning a new page in our book. And so when you tell stories about these magical places and these magical people, what happens is we're creating openings within our imagination that can receive transmissions of knowledge that gets added into our story and maybe even affects the way we tell our story, or should I say the way we live our story. So for example, right now I'm writing a book which is all about the life of Joseph of Arimathea, which is a very misunderstood and not well known character in Jesus's life. And the book, it's going to be a 3-part book series. And the book that I'm writing now, the second book in that series, is about Jesus's time here in Avalon, because a lot of people don't realize what Jesus did during his lifetime. And again, we can, if we have time, we can certainly talk a lot about that. It's one of my favorite type of areas to explore.
Sure.
But he spent his life, or essentially the life between when he was this baby, you know, because we read the Bible, here's this magical baby as Jesus, and, you know, he's recognized as a special being. And then 30 years later, he shows up on the scene as God, you know, quote unquote God. And it's like, well, okay, what happened? You know, like what took place during his life that allowed him to become this divine being? And a lot of that is what put me on this path of studying, you know, these ancient Gnostic stories and the life of Yeshua and Mary Magdalene. And so that's a big area to cover, but long story short, Jesus spent his adolescent years actually here in Avalon. So when he spent his life traveling to different mystery schools, the place he spent his adolescence, or his coming of age, you could say, stepping into his manhood, was actually here in Avalon. And that's actually a really beautiful and important story for people to understand, because Avalon is very much a place of the divine feminine. It's very much a feminine-oriented portal. It's a place where the goddess is understood and accepted and received. And so for Jesus to go through his coming of age years, you know, his puberty, his stepping into manhood in a place that was so reverent and connected to the divine feminine, that means as he stepped into his manhood, he did so in an environment that actually embraced the goddess, so that he could step into his manhood, not only crystallizing what it means to be a man in his role as a man and embodying the Christ of the Logos and the masculine principles of the Christed energy. He was doing this process and coming of age, as well learning about the feminine, learning about the goddess, and really being educated in the place where his masculinity knew how to receive the goddess. So one of the stories I'm actually currently writing in my book right now is when Yeshua is the name of Jesus, if anyone's not listening, is Aramaic name. And so when he stepped into his manhood, it was very important that he did so both being balanced in his understanding of masculinity and in the understanding of femininity and what womanhood actually means. So one of my favorite stories in Avalon is Jesus actually had his first crush, you could say, or his first kind of relationship, his first entry into relating to the feminine during his years here in Avalon. So this again, imagine, this young man stepping into his puberty and going through this, like, awakening into his sexual fire and his maturity and his potency. Even for a divine being incarnate like Jesus, like Yeshua was, it's still going to be a very confusing time, and it's still very much going to be an area where he needs to understand where his biological impulses will resonate and connect with his maybe emotional impulses and his spiritual desires, how these all relate. And so education of the feminine would be very important to him at this time. So when Joseph of Arimathea, who is Yeshua's uncle, when he noticed Yeshua, Jesus, was really starting to have this desire and drive to connect to the feminine, he realized it was important for Jesus to actually learn about the feminine and to be initiated into the feminine by powerful women or by a powerful woman. So one of the stories that I'm writing about in my book is the time when Joseph of Arimathea brought Jesus to meet with a woman who's known as Nagig. And what Nagig is a term for a wild woman, kind of like a shamanistic oracle woman who lives in a cave, and we always see that across the entire planet. There's always these like wise oracular women that live in this cave, and you go to them to receive wisdom. So this Nagig woman, Jesus was brought there by Joseph specifically for the purpose of helping initiate him into the understanding of what womanhood means and how the masculine is to connect with it. And so when he brought Jesus to this cave, and it's amazing because the cave itself essentially represents the womb, the yoni, the entire process. So literally just Jesus walking into this cave is, again, it's like going into the womb temple. And he spent 3 days with this Nagig shaman woman, and she brought him through, again, all the understandings of what true womanhood and womanhood power means. She initiated him into like the idea of the blood mysteries, what menstrual cycles mean, the cyclical nature of woman, and most importantly, how men can relate and connect and honor and receive from and actually uplift the more mystical qualities of womanhood. And so it was a beautiful initiation for him stepping into his manhood to, again, he's crystallizing what it means to be a man, and that we can certainly talk about his initiations into masculinity. But I found this was so beautiful because it was also initiating him into the understanding of his role as a man in relating to the divine feminine and how to be a force that supports, protects, uplifts, and connects on a very deep level with the feminine. And so all that being said, how that affects me personally is I actually feel like for the first time in my life, I'm stepping into my manhood. Like, I'm 34 years old now. I couldn't have stepped into my manhood any sooner. And so I feel this beautiful process coming in me where I'm stepping into my manhood. And in doing so, I need to make sure that it happens in a way that's both authentic and important to anchoring what it means to be a man in today's world, but also what my role and my relationship is to the feminine. And this lens certainly is teaching me a lot about that.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story. I never heard that story before. Is that something that you've heard, like rumors in Glastonbury, or is this something that you picking up yourself?
So all of the stories that I tell are usually come broad spectrum. So I do a lot of research into historical kind of anything that I can find that has some historical basis and what can be a verified fact. And then you have all of the Gnostic stories that have been written down over time. And a lot of the sources of what I like to share come from a group of people called the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the desert. So these group of people I find are the most accurate and uncorrupted sources of a lot of the stories of the Essenes and a lot of the stories of Yeshua, and especially what Mary Magdalene did after Yeshua's crucifixion. Because essentially these were a group of people that were very close to Jesus before his crucifixion. And then, of course, after Jesus was crucified, resurrected, and ascended, it became a very dangerous time for all of the followers of Yeshua at that time. I mean, they were being hunted and persecuted and killed from many different groups of people. And so in order to basically protect a lot of this knowledge and also protect themselves, you had these groups of some of the very closest disciples just simply retreated into the desert. And so they became known as the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the desert because they were there offering all of these oral tradition stories to anyone who was ready to receive them, who were deemed worthy to receive them, or who were open enough to receive the true histories of both, the Christ, the Logos, the Christ, the Sophia, the teachings of both Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, the core teachings, the teachings that were present long before the Bible was written. And so I tend to cite and also give a lot of credit to those stories because they were kind of the predecessors of the Gnostics. A lot of the Gnostic stories came from these people. And then, of course, there's the stories here in Avalon, the historical-based stories that come from the Druids, because a lot of, if you want to learn about different mystery schools, one of the best ways to do it is study one mystery school from the perspective of other mystery schools, because a lot of the mystery schools themselves didn't carry a lot of their own knowledge. They carried a lot of what they taught, but not so much their history, you could say. So I find a lot of references about Jesus and the Essenes coming from the ancient Egyptians and coming from the Druids. And then, of course, there's my own kind of intuitive channelings and my own kind of synthesis of a lot of different source materials. And so the stories of Yeshua's coming of age and his stories of how he learned about womanhood, although you couldn't point to one story and say that's the truth, that's the fact, but they all sort of circumnavigate and vortex around the idea that there came a point in Jesus's life where he was initiated by the feminine. And again, I think that's very important. And it's also one of the lost traditions, I feel, in today's world where, well, we don't have any rites of passage at all in the Western world. And we certainly don't have rites of passage from groups of men bringing men into their fullness. And one of the lost arts, something that was done in the mystery schools, was that groups of women would also help initiate and teach men as they come of age. And so for me, what I like to both visualize and imagine is Yeshua going through a process like that in Avalon during his puberty years, and what would that look like? And then, of course, in the Druids cultures and histories, there's these Nagig shaman oracle women who live in caves who are literally embodiments of true womb and feminine wisdom that would receive both men and women. So to me, it's like, of course, it would make sense that at some point Yeshua would have been initiated by a woman to some degree, and then maybe it's my own intuitive feelings that he would have been brought to one of these oracular women whose almost job it was to help dispense this wisdom.
So what is the book called?
Sorry?
What is the title of the book?
Oh, so the entire series will be the life and teachings of Joseph of Arimathea. So the first book will be about Joseph's early years, again, because he's a very kind of misunderstood or not well-known character in the whole Christed story. But he, in my opinion, is one of the most important characters. And certainly in the life of Jesus, he was the uncle. Some people say great uncle, but in the end, it doesn't matter. What was important is that he was very much a mentor figure and very much a father figure. And a lot of the Gnostic accounts, Joseph Arimathea spent more time with Yeshua than even Yeshua's father did. Again, whether it's true or not doesn't matter. But what's important is that he would have been a major figure in the story of Jesus's life, and certainly in the story of Mary Magdalene after the time of Jesus. So the first book is about his early years, who Joseph was, how he grew up, what he learned. And Joseph Arimathea actually has a very long history here in Avalon. He spent the majority of his life actually in the UK. The second book is about his time with Jesus, his role of bringing Jesus through all the activations of the Druids. And then the third book is going to be about the time post-crucifixion and resurrection, and specifically Joseph of Arimathea's role and presence in the life of Mary Magdalene.
So so can you tell us a little bit of the stories of Mary Magdalene?
Ooh, just like stories of her in general, or her times with Joseph?
Anything that you want to share that's, that it's all connected to what you're saying here.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, it's actually because of her where this entire kind of Christed journey started with me, because Mary Magdalene, when I turned 25, she actually began appearing to me and in many ways catalyzing a journey that would bring me to where I am today, funny enough. So it's all beautifully and synchronistically connected. And kind of through my connection to her, she kind of steered me into this almost like scholar-like direction of learning as many of the Gnostic stories and the grandmother and the grandfather's stories as I possibly could, just to turn into a sponge and receive it all. And in doing so, I came across all these beautiful stories of the Essenes and how they would essentially initiate women. That's where a lot of my inspiration started, because I would read these beautiful stories of, for instance, what happens in the Essene community when a young woman receives her first bleed, her first menstruation cycle. And so all the women would gather in these communities, from young women all the way up to the elders, the crones, and they would bring this young woman out into the wilderness and spend her entire cycle with her, again, teaching her about womanhood, teaching her about the magic and the mysteries contained within her blood, the blood rituals, the cycle rituals. And most importantly, they would teach, again, what her role was in connecting with her own inner feminine, but also with the collective feminine and the mystical aspects of what it means to be a part of the sisterhood. And I remember reading some of these stories and you know, one just being in tears of how beautiful they were, but also it was like this deep sadness that, again, like we as men, we don't have these type of similar initiations, or at least we don't have it in modern days. There were certainly those stories in the ancient days about Mary Magdalene, or about Mary Magdalene in relationship to the masculine. And so I just would fill myself with as many of the stories as I possibly could of her, because again, whether they're true or not is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's what do these stories catalyze within us? And so a lot of my favorite stories of Mary Magdalene, you know, related to the way she would interact again with Jesus, with Yeshua, because there's so many beautiful archetypal things we can receive from just even the symbolic interactions that they had together. So for me, I love especially the stories of Mary Magdalene dancing. And, you know, a lot of people, again, don't realize how much of an initiated dancer she was, because similar to how Jesus traveled the world and studied with different mystery schools, so did Mary Magdalene. And there's lots of stories about where she went during her life, which schools. And again, these are all beautiful things to put out there. But in the end, where she went is not as important as what she received from the places that she went. So a lot of people understand what mudras are. So mudras are kind of different type of hand frequency generation techniques. So it's almost like you're creating sacred geometry with your hands. You're in essence, you're communicating energy with your hands. So this is one of the things that she allegedly learned during her times in India, is understanding, you know, what these mudras represent. And then when she spent time in Egypt within the Isis and the Hathor schools, she learned how you could actually create mudras with your entire body. So depending on the positions and the ways you would move your body, you would actually be in essence creating energy mudras with your entire body, and learning how to weave that together in a dance, so that as she would dance, she was creating these like living geometries, these living mudras, almost telling a story with the motions of her dance that would then be an emanation or a transmission of energy for healing, for upliftment, for opening gateways, whatever you want to go into it with your imagination. But she learned the ritual art of dancing. So when she was with some of the closest disciples, there's all these beautiful stories of how when she would dance, you know, demons would be cast out of people. People would spontaneously and miraculously heal. And when she didn't want anyone to dance, when she just wanted to be witnessed, again, there's some archetypal and metaphorical wisdom for the feminine learning to be witnessed. No one in the audience, like no one in the room could move. They would sit transfixed by her movements and learn to receive. And the stories would be that when Mary Magdalene would dance in her full presence, the crown of the Shekinah would descend upon her. And, you know, there's all these beautiful translations of what the crown of the Shekinah represented. But a lot of the symbolism is that it was a crown made of starlight. And it, in essence, it was the light that came out of the depths of the blackness of the cosmos, which in many ways is like the womb space. So when the holy crown of the Shekinah would descend upon her, she would then be, in essence, the full emanation of the power of the feminine as it emerges from the great void space or the womb space. And so people would just sit transfixed, receiving, you know, what these transmissions would be coming from her dance. And then if she wanted everyone to dance with her, you couldn't sit still. You would be taken up in rapture, and the entire room would be dancing with her. So all that being said, bringing it back to what it means to Yeshua and her interaction with him, is that sometimes there's all these beautiful stories of when Yeshua would take up dance with Mary Magdalene. And again, a lot of these stories, they're designed to tell deeper truths through the imagination. So yes, I'm sure they dance together all the time, but what does it actually mean by telling the story of Yeshua and Mary Magdalene dancing? And what does it actually mean when you're thinking about the archetypal divine masculine and divine feminine dancing together? So a lot of the stories would be when they would take up dance together, all sorts of miracles would take place in the village. Again, we're talking about, again, miracles being dispensed from their interaction, their joy, their inner like playful nature is getting to be expressed together and playing in that beautiful dance. And then some of my favorite stories are where Yeshua would simply sit and abide in prayer and meditation in the center of the room. And he would just be glowing his Christ light during that process. And Mary Magdalene would be dancing this circle around him. And as she danced around him, she would be extending his light out to every place and everyone in the entire universe, in essence being that feminine channel for which the light can shine through, the void space or the womb space in which that light shines through. So why I love reading and learning about these stories is because not only are they just beautiful and always bring me to tears, there's so many deeper levels and nuggets of wisdom that you can pull out of it. And that's how the Gnostics actually did their teaching, is that there would be different layers to the same exact story, to the exact same image. And it's up to us to cultivate our ability to receive the deeper truths of these stories. And it's not limited to anything but our own desire to dive deeper and to be able to receive maybe some of the more esoteric or the more ethereal wisdoms that are contained in these stories.
Yeah, basically whatever resonates, right?
Yeah, whatever resonates. Yeah, I mean that's one of my favorite quotes by Jesus, and it's one of his controversial quotes. Is it said he said, "I'm not here to bring peace. I'm here to bring a sword." And now that puts a lot of people in an uproar because, like, well, no, he's like the peacemaker. Why is he talking about swords and fighting? But again, this is why I've loved studying Aramaic for 2 years now, because I get to read, and also understand what he actually said in his own language that he said it. And so when you get into the Aramaic root word for sword, it actually translates as discrimination or discernment. And so what he was teaching people is how to discern your truth. Again, it's that sword of truth. Learn to cultivate that sword of truth so you can find your own truth. And no truth is, you could say, the absolute when it's on this level. It's up to us to, again, create our resonances with it. And so, yeah, I fully agree. It's for everyone to discern what's real and what their truth is. And if something resonates, amazing, take it in. And if it doesn't resonate, compost it. And it's just as great.
Well, sometimes something might not resonate at first, and then later it will resonate because you've changed.
Yes.
Change within you, or quite the opposite. Sometimes it resonates and then it changes. It doesn't resonate anymore. And it's just, it's a matter of your consciousness or your growth, or even just your field opening up to different stories. Like you're saying, it's hard to call them truths now because no one has really, we can't say what is right and what is wrong. We can't say this is the book of truth and this one isn't. We really don't know because, like you said, some other mystery schools will write about the different mystery schools and sometimes they don't even match. But it's amazing how you've taken this road, this path, so deeply. What the catalyst was Mary Magdalene when you were 25, but what about moving into Glastonbury and moving into the Druids? Have they also reached out to you? What was the catalyst there? What was the pull there?
Well, originally it was because I wanted to go on my own kind of Christed pilgrimage, because I wanted to go to some of these mystery schools that Jesus had spent time in. I just felt, since I was spending so many of my years, researching and studying and allowing his teachings and wisdom into my life, that it just felt right that I also go on my own kind of pilgrimage and in some ways kind of reenact these initiations that he went through. And so the first two places that I felt called to go was Glastonbury and then to Egypt, because again, Yeshua spent many years in Egypt, going through initiations there too. So those were the two mystery school areas that I felt initially called to. And so when I came to Glastonbury, it was, in many ways, it just felt like I was coming home, where as I walk this land, it's like, wow, my bare feet are touching the same land that Jesus's feet walked on, that Joseph Arimathea's feet walked on, that Mary Magdalene's feet at some point in her life walked on, as well as the Druids and the Druidic lore. And again, it's fascinating because no one knows exactly where the shift took place, where the original Druids were very matriarchal based. It morphed into a much more patriarchal base. And again, it's not necessarily patriarchy as holding women down, but there was a shift that took place that oriented the Druids to be far more male or man-centric. And that's what we see today. And so it's been really interesting for me to exist and to connect with and to learn from a lot of the kind of the Druidic cultures that are still in existence today, that are very male-centric, while also understanding what it once was and the teachings that maybe have changed as it became much more male-centric. Because again, the Druids are fascinating because they're so, the original Druids were very representative of, again, the earth, Gaian, wisdom, mother kind of energy. And you still see, go ahead, sorry.
Let me just ask one thing, because I know my audience might not know too much about the Druids. So who are the Druids exactly? Yeah, so let's really go deep into that.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I mean, I'll never come from a place where I'm an expert or anything I have to say is the truth. But what's a very interesting common thread between all of the mystery schools is that they all claim to be a legacy civilization, or as they come from something much older. That's a very common story you see in all the different cultures. So the Druids have a very similar description of their genesis as the ancient Egyptians do. So, for example, in the ancient Egyptians, when you hear their stories of where they came from, the way it gets translated is actually a really interesting way that it gets translated, because it can be translated in two ways, and both ways are super thought-provoking, to say the least. But the ancient Egyptians claimed to be a legacy civilization, so that a lot of what they were and what they had came from a much older place. And so when you translate, what they would say is that they either said that their ancestors came from either across the ocean, so you can translate as across the ocean, across the sea. And so that brings up a lot of Atlantis, Lemuria, something across the ocean, or maybe under the ocean, whatever it might be. And the other way to translate that word is across the heavens, or the celestial heavens, so space. So both those translations from the ancient Egyptians are very interesting, because they either means Atlantean, Lemuria, some lost civilization, or extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, across the celestial heavens. The Druids have a very similar Genesis belief system, where they inherited a lot of what they hold or held. And a lot of their wisdom as it pertained to the Earth Mother came from a much older place and a much older peoples. And we can only speculate what those peoples are, but you can kind of learn a little bit about maybe what those original peoples were by what the ancient Druids held as importance to them, which is, again, understanding that the Earth has consciousness, that the Earth is alive, and it's our ability to create these connections with the Earth Mother to help us grow and to help us turn into what would be considered a whole being, or an emanation of the Divine Mother. And so, again, the original teachings of the Druids had everything to do with, again, that energy of going down within, inhabiting ourselves fully, and connecting to the Earth Mother, and seeing our relationship to the Earth Mother and to that feminine principle. So the Druids held this as the core of their teachings, is how to connect with that divine feminine or Earth Mother principle, and how to make that real in our lives, and to help us heal in the full capacity.
Okay, so we don't know where they're really from, but they landed in Glastonbury only, or was it just all of England?
All of the UK at the time. And what's interesting too is you'll have to think about it at a time even 12,000 years ago. So the Earth went through a major shift about 12,000 years ago. And what I'm sharing now is just geological evidence. It's not so much like spiritual stories, but at some point the ice caps melted, from the last ice age. And when the ice caps melted, and again, we can speculate how and what caused them to melt, sea levels rose everywhere on the planet anywhere from 300 to 700 feet. So we're talking about a huge amount of landmass suddenly went underwater. And when that happened, you could just imagine what would our current society do if all of the coastal areas started flooding. People would go to higher ground, or people would go to where the water wasn't. And so the Druids, wherever they came from, they settled in the UK. So we're talking Scotland, Ireland, and England. But the landmass here was much, much bigger at one point. There's so much more than we currently see now. Mm-hmm. And so the Druids would have then inhabited the entire region, and not just limited to the UK. We're talking about, there's lots of stories of Druid activity all the way up into Scandinavia and Iceland and Greenland and these type of places too. So they would have settled everywhere in the conceivable area. And so Avalon just happened to be their main mystery school base when it related to these specific activations. But the Druid presence, and you can see that certainly in the standing stone sites and the different stone sites around the UK, was very widespread and very diverse.
Mm-hmm. It kind of survived in the UK.
Oh yes, for very much so. Like, again, that's the beautiful part about these mystery schools, is the way I describe the mystery schools is they're all ice cream. They're all essentially teaching the same thing, but they're just different flavors of ice cream. And so the Druids just had a very specific flavor to their teachings, which again happen to relate to down and in, and to the Earth Mother, and to that Gaian wisdom, versus other mystery schools had slightly different flavors, but they all ultimately teach the same thing. So the Druidic order became the holders of the wisdom of the Earth Mother, and it's certainly about the cyclical nature of life, and how it related as below, so above, and as above, so below. So they very much were holding that energy of so below and how the earth related to the grander cosmos.
I feel like Taoism also does has that same study where it's more inward and more connection with the lands, with that the magnetic field of the earth. So yeah, you're right. There's so many interchangeable mystery schools on the planet, and yes, they're all their own different flavor of ice cream. So the Druids, for some reason, I see them very tall beings. Is that true?
Mm. I mean, it's tough to say because we wouldn't have photographs back then, but
Okay.
I don't know if they were necessarily known, at least in the UK, for their higher stature. You know, when you think about kind of the ancient Scandinavian countries and the Vikings and the people who came before the Vikings, they're kind of, you know, they have the reputation of being very big
Mhm.
and very tall. I haven't come across anyone who would describe the consistency of the Druids as being inherently taller than maybe regular people at the time, but they would very much have a presence that would be very potent. So that they were known for, again, being very grounded, and super present, where there's all these stories of that if you were in the presence of the ancient Druids, you couldn't tell lies, you couldn't deceive, you couldn't do all these things because their very nature plugged them into a level of integrity and integration with the great Earth Mother that nothing other than what would reflect that great mother would be allowed, just in their emanation, just in their aura. So to me, if someone asked, like, were the Druids big? Well, I would say they were big, but probably more energetically big than maybe physical in stature.
Right. And they were Christed beings.
Oh, I mean, well, I guess it depends how we share what the Christ means. But for me, like, Christ is a title,
Yeah.
not so much a person.
Right.
And so, and we all get to define what Christ means in our own way. But for me, a big aspect of being Christed means in full integration and balance with yourself as a human and in a physical form, as well as in the divine realms. Um, and so the Druids very much were that. They had a very much a focus around integration, of seeing how their physical vessels became uh, vehicles in which spirit could dwell.
And so is there any like what is left of these Druids mysteries? What is the
Mhm.
result of it?
Mhm. Well, so it's all broken up, just like most of the mystery schools. You know, there's only remnants and echoes left. But what's really beautiful is that even if the physical structures and the physical forms are not necessarily there anymore, you can still energetically tap into it. Because again, these things get woven into the fabrics of reality at many different levels. So what I love most about Avalon is the idea of the tunnel system and the caves below Avalon. So I remember coming here, and I've read a lot about, you know, the tunnel systems here, and I just didn't know if they were real or not. I had no idea. And you know, they could also be metaphorical or symbolic. But you know, throughout my life, I've spent a lot of time in different mystery schools, and I've always ended up in ancient tunnel systems. It just seems to be part of my dharma, and also just inner child joy of getting to explore these like lost tunnel systems. So when I came to Glastonbury, it was very fascinating because I was like, ooh, I wonder if these tunnel systems are real and what they represent. And I came quickly to find out that they are actually real and they're still very much here. And what's fascinating too is the ancient Druid stories are that the Druids didn't actually build the majority of these tunnel systems. And these, basically, it's like an underground university that connects all the different points of Avalon. All the major hills they're all hollow, you could say, in the sense that they all have things inside, and all the different areas of Avalon are connected through underground tunnels. So the real magic of Avalon is actually what's underneath it. And then I was fortunate enough to actually be able to explore a lot of these tunnels physically, and to go into a lot of these hill spaces physically within my own vessel. And I'm like, wow, well, I'm in here, so they're real. And two, one, you know, they represent the lost wisdom that's waiting to be discovered, but the energy that they still hold is something so powerful. And you know, I've just scratched the surface of what's actually in these tunnel systems. I'm sure there's a lot still there and a lot that's still very much active. And so what I like about that is so much of Glastonbury, the current, you know, modern day Avalon, it's very much changed to be like this village, this town, this city. And there's a lot of things still left, but nothing really left from the time of the ancient Druids other than the water sources. Um, but underground, it's still very much there. And so I think just because of that, it's symbolic again to show if you go beneath the surface, what can be there waiting to be found. But again, a lot of the Druidic traditions are not just about what's on the surface, they're what's underground. And what's underground is so important because it creates the energy foundation and base in which the wisdom can still be shared and tapped into. And that is still very much here.
And why do you think they built that?
The tunnels?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, again, only speculating here. Who knows who
Yeah,
actually who built them or what they were for? But so what I like the idea in the mystery schools, and they still talk a lot about this in ancient Egypt, is the idea that you would create physical spaces that would then represent an archetypal process. So for example, in one of the hills here in Avalon was a place where the high priestesses would be initiated. So any of the priestesses that were ready to go through their initiation into being a high priestess would have to go through this initiation inside one of these hills. And what would take place is she would be led inside this hill into a chamber or a cave, and she would be sealed in this cave for 10 days, no food, no water, in pure darkness. And I think for a lot of people that already brings up anxiety of just being in a dark room for even a few minutes, let alone 10 days. And so during this process, what it was designed to do for her stepping into her full power as the woman, and all the symbolic reasons of what it means to step into your power and your high priestess nature, is that being in that darkness for so long was going to help her merge into what's known as the void light, or the womb space, or the primordial darkness of the womb. So after that 10 days, it's not so much that she would be teaching about this void light consciousness and emanating the void energy. She would be that energy. It would be so saturated into her field. And what's really interesting too is they found out recently that biologically, if we are in darkness for an extended period of time, usually about 5 days, depending on your constitution and your physiology, your body starts converting melatonin into DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is a very potent psychedelic or shamanic entheogen. And so it's cool that the ancient peoples would have known about this, even if they didn't know exactly what it was. So think about this woman going to this cave in this extended fasted state, going through this huge psychedelic DMT journey in darkness, merging into her power, coming out as the high priestess and a true emanation of the Earth Mother. So to me, again, they would have had a lot of these underground areas as symbolic physicalizations of deeper protocols. And so there's different places in Avalon that as you would go through these rooms, they would be built almost and designed as a reflection of a process. Again, for example, like the Nagid cave, like when you go into this cave, it's like you're going through the yoni into the womb space, and then you're in there. So I think a lot of these underground chambers, and really they were underground temples, were built as a physical representation of deeper truths, so that not only are you thinking about it and energetically experiencing it, you're physically experiencing it too, just as a lot of the temples in ancient Egypt are designed to represent different chakra systems and physiological schematics, whatever you want to call them. I think it's important to make sure that on all levels you're being initiated, and being in a physical space that does that is one of them. And just very simply, going underground is like a process of going into the underworld.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Egypt also has these underground, but so does France.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all connected. It's very
Yes.
interesting how the stories, the people just kind of navigated through these lands and created similar structures so that humanity could ascend.
Yes.
And
oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, but I think that's what we're doing now.
Oh, for sure.
Without building the structures.
Yes. Well, or maybe to say, and even more accurately, is we are building structures, we're just doing it differently. We're building them etherically and internally.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to say. Yes.
Yes.
And so this is the new era of the earth, that we're building these etheric structures when they had to build these physical structures, which was much more difficult.
Yes.
And who was building the structures? The men.
Mm-hmm.
And they were building them for the feminine. That's my feeling.
Yes.
Always in honor
of
the feminine, the planet Earth. And like, as you said, in during this podcast, is all about, honoring the feminine, but of course honoring themselves, because that's where they came from.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I fully agree. And I remember I went through this like mini depression maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I just was like heartbroken that I will never get to go to these mystery schools as they were, in those times, 2, 3, 4,000 years ago. I was like, why? Like, I'll never be able to go to these places. where, you know, these masters and these ascended beings were teaching. And that feeling actually shifted. I went to a relatively famous and well-known kind of channel, and I had a private session with them. And what was fascinating is I asked him that, you know, I was sharing about my sadness at the mystery school. He's like, you don't get it. He's like, you and humanity, you don't need that anymore, or you don't need it in the same way that you needed it back then. In the sense, like, he gave me this really cool example that if you and I, for example, if we got in a time machine and we went back in time 2,000 years ago, we would come out of that time machine and we would literally look like we were glowing to those people. If you understand that the relative consciousness or collective consciousness back then was much lower than it is now. So us just being regular people, we would be glowing to those people because our frequency relative to them is so high, just being where we are in today's world. So in those days, he was sharing that it was very important and needed for people who were on, you know, a Christed path or a pathway of greater wisdom and knowledge and ascension, would have to go to these schools because the field of the planet and the frequency of the planet was so low. You'd have to find these schools were like lighthouses or beacons in which you could experience it. And he was saying, now we're actually born, like if enlightenment's here, Christed here, we're just being born, we're right there. Just a small reach up. So we actually don't need these mystery schools anymore the way we needed them back then. It's all so much integrated in our collective frequency. And you're saying it's not as important so much that we learn anything anymore. It's much more important that we integrate and we live this stuff and emanate this stuff. And so that shifted a lot for me. I was like, okay, so we actually don't need these mystery schools anymore. And we have a new idea of mystery schools. We're our own personal mystery school. And we're building this etheric temple within our own field. And the paradox is, the more that we build our own temple and anchor this stuff, the easier it becomes for everyone else. So it just becomes this like acceleration process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the same way where the practices are not needed either. So the practices were really important because they were basically holding the energy within their bodies so that they can give birth to new humanity where they would also carry that frequency, that vibration. And so it was so important to kind of hold this pure vibration, this high frequency, and, you know, in these dense times. But now it's not needed anymore because we're awakened. We just awaken to this frequency just like that. Like I myself, I'm not sure what my vibration was like when I was a child or before I had my Kundalini awakening, but right after my Kundalini awakening, my vibration shifted so much and just keeps growing as if I'm my own temple, as if there's prayer happening within this body every day. And it just happens naturally. I'm just naturally guided to to talk about this, to be this, to know this. It's just a natural thing. It's not, I'm not forcing myself to be this person. I am this person. And it's bringing back these old memories of the ancient mysteries and the temple times. And yes, and I dream about it and I meditate on it sometimes, not all the time, but you know, so many different things that are just kind of coming to us naturally. It's like, here, the divine just saying, here, it's yours. It's yours. And it's like, maybe we've worked for it for all this time, but this time is just, it's the time that the divine is just giving it to us.
Yes.
We don't have to work for it. It's pure grace. And I feel like the more we try to work for it, the more it won't come to us. Because it's the ego that wants to, you know, have that power or something to that degree. So
I fully agree.
So how did you have a spontaneous awakening, or was it a process? I know you had Mary Magdalene come to you when you were 25, but what happened before that?
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily had a spontaneous awakening as much, because I remember when I was a child, I guess I'd be called born awake in the sense that I'd just be out in the woods talking to fairies and feeling the energies of trees and just understanding crystals. And I just, throughout my childhood, I went through a lot of trauma with my parents. And so I feel like that process of going through so much trauma closed my heart down. It really just like closed me off to the idea of love and having a very open heart. And so it's been a process of like de-armoring my heart and opening up my heart more and more. And so it's been this like beautiful gradual process of doing so, of kind of just correcting. I don't want to say correcting as if it was wrong, but just healing a lot of the things I took on as a child, so I could get back to our natural place. Because I think everyone is just born this divine cosmic being connected to source and spirit. And it's life that affects that connection. And it's ultimately our responsibility to, no matter what happens to us, is to work our way back to that place, if we want to work our way back to that place. And I've just chosen this lifetime, despite anything I might have experienced as a child, to work on coming back into my heart and opening my heart back up. And that's been the process I've been on probably since I was about 18 or 19 years old, of like really being aware and seeing I have a responsibility, you know, and getting out of blame or judgment or saying this person or this situation is responsible for who I am now. I could say that and I could try and justify that, but the only real power I felt I had is, okay, I can take it on and work with it. And actually, it's been a beautiful blessing of not necessarily bypassing what happened to me as wrong, but seeing like, wow, like, what a cool challenge. Like, what a cool challenge. And I love challenges. I love riddles and mysteries and figuring stuff out. So for me, I was like, wow, my entire life is like this mystery of how do I put myself back together, and can I do it? And letting, instead of feeling like a victim or someone who's carrying a lot of trauma, not knowing what to do with it, it became a game of like, yeah, this is like, what an epic challenge, and can I do it? And seeing if I can do it. And so since about 18, 19, 20, I've just been on this beautiful path of like, I know it's there and I can feel the depths of my heart, and now it's like, can I get back in there? And so just slowly de-armoring. And so I had a lot of beautiful activations and awakenings kind of take place along that path, but it was more being coordinated and choreographed to certain openings that would take place in my heart. And so a big one was when I turned 25, again, was really taking in this radical responsibility of my journey. And I think that's what put me on Mary Magdalene's radar. And she felt what I was cultivating and going through and healing. And she showed up offering an opportunity to work with her. And it was up to me to say yes or no. And I chose yes.
So beautiful. So now you're doing retreats, and
yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, yeah. So I run a few different retreats around the world, but right now it seems that the energies of Avalon want me to stay in Avalon for the part where, like, I've tried to leave a few times over the past year and few months, and every time it feels like Lady Avalon is keeping me here. And I remember when I came to Avalon, I actually didn't know who Lady Avalon was. I didn't know about any of the mythologies of the Celtic or the Druid traditions and Avalon. I kind of came here blissfully ignorant. And I'm actually glad I didn't pre-research anything before I came here, because it allowed me the opportunity to meet and greet these energies, very naively and very intuitively. And so when the idea of starting to be of service to this land and bringing through people into activations is, I was very fortunate enough when I came to Avalon, where I lived at a place called the Chalice Well. It's known as the Red Spring. And it has a very deep connection to the energies of the divine feminine, of the divine mother. And also Mary Magdalene gets woven in these stories, whether she was actually there or not. Again, it's up to us to discern. But when I was there, I had some very unique opportunities to essentially be out with the Chalice Well at night by myself. And it gave me a beautiful opportunity to, again, plug into this land and away from all the tourism, away from all the hustle and bustle or anything that happens, during the daytime, to be out there just by myself at night, again, learning to listen to the land. And I performed a ritual that Mary Magdalene guided me to perform. And it's all about a lost art within the masculine that the Essenes would teach. So one of the lost arts of the masculine in the Essenes is cultivating a relationship with our sacred seed and making seed offerings. And what I mean by that, so for example, the equivalent for the feminine would be women who make offerings with your moon blood, with your menstruation blood. And so it's a very common practice for women to do certain blood rituals or certain blood offerings at certain sacred sites or with the earth and on the land. And so one of the Essene principles of the masculine is, again, it's about coming into relationship with our sacred seed. So that's the essence of our semen, and also the etheric or energetic understanding of what our seed or our baby making energy is all about. And so one of those arts or one of those rituals is, again, the way that men would also consciously offer their seed essence to the land. And so Mary Magdalene guided me to make a seed offering at the Red Spring in the Chalice Well, to that land there. And when that happened, what was interesting is I felt this entire grid matrix open up. And that's actually when Lady Avalon appeared to me the first time. And it was very, very humbling for me, in the sense that I remember when Lady Avalon first appeared, I actually greeted her with my ego, where like I felt her kind of coming up to me. I thought she wanted me to be her lover or something like that. You know, again, the ego where it takes us. And I was like, ooh, this is Lady Avalon. She wants me to be like her masculine lover or consort or something like that. And in that moment, I was so humbled because I felt the immensity of her. And like, I was just emasculated instantly. I was like, oh my God, like I don't have anywhere near the presence or the ability to connect with the immensity of what Lady Avalon represents. And Lady Avalon is the kind of overlighting feminine spirit of this land. And she was very graceful in helping teach me that humble lesson, because she's like, of course you're not ready to connect with me, but she's like, one day you will be. And that's what put me on this process of learning how to come into relationship with this land here, and really learning how to listen to this land. And really it's about learning, the way I visualize it is learning how to hear Lady Avalon. And so for about 5 months, she, like, because I wanted to start leading people here right away. But again, that's that process of being humble and learning to listen, and letting the land teach me versus what I think as a person. So she spent about 5 months just taking me to all the places on the land, and just learning how to listen, and starting to feel the frequencies and the directions that the energy was flowing, and also starting to absorb as many of the stories and also my intuitive guidances. And then so at the end of that 5, almost 6 months, that's when I actually felt she gave me permission. She's like, okay, now you're ready to bring people into these activations here. So for the past year, I've been guiding and leading people through activations in Avalon, specifically about the ancient history of the Druids and what all these different areas in Avalon meant to the ancient Druids, and then getting to weave in the stories of Joseph of Arimathea, of Jesus, of Mary Magdalene, and then weaving those stories into the stories of King Arthur and Merlin, and seeing how these different archetypal characters really played an important role in the history of Avalon. Whether you want to believe they were real or not, they certainly played an important role in the cultural history and the teachings of this place, and seeing how we can tap into that, how we can access that for our modern lives. And at the same time, getting to visit these incredible sites, which are just powerful on their own.
I'm sure. Yeah, I see some of it on your Instagram, and then of course all your social media. So it's interesting. You know, you get a lot of different kinds of people, but mostly women. I see.
Yes.
Perhaps it's that feminine energy that's pulling them. But it's interesting. I wish that more men would join the Lady of Avalon because she definitely has a lot to teach. And but it's amazing, you know, what you've been going through in this past year and a half. It's interesting to see you blossom into what you are today. And I'm sure you have a lot, you know, to integrate as you go on, but you know, it's a never-ending process for all of us, and that's what keeps us humble, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, there's never an end to it, and there's never an end to how we can listen more and more.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your stories. I particularly love the story of the Druids because it's my first time learning of them. Yeah, so thank you so much for that. And if you want to share your website or anything right now, it's a good time to do that.
Of course. Well, the first thing I recommend is anyone who wants to follow me on social media, they can find me as Oliver William Huntley on Facebook. And then on Instagram, it's Awakening Masculine. And I'm actually right now in this beautiful process where Spirit's guiding me to relaunch my website. So I don't want to give my old website anymore. I'm going to be launching a new one specifically around the teachings of the Essenes, the Christed Path, and the Druids here in Avalon, because I feel like that's where my true life energy is most excited to express. So as soon as I have that ready to launch, I'll certainly send it to you. But if for now, if anyone wants to follow me on social media, just find me on Facebook, Oliver William Huntley, or they can connect on Instagram, where I spend most of my time on Instagram, which is Awakening Masculine.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I hope to meet you soon, Oliver. I know we've been trying to connect, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Until next time.
Until next time, thank you.